Thank you so much. So, I will be talking about the implementation of the WTO anti-dumping agreement in India. And the central argument that I'm trying to make here is that till now, India's implementation of this agreement has been, there have been a lot of WTO law violations till now. And so I'm trying to suggest as to how to correct those violations. Now, before I go on to demonstrate those violations, I'll be talking a bit about the context in which these violations have taken place. So let us look at the anti-dumping instrument. Now, the anti-dumping instrument, the first anti-dumping law was enacted by Canada in 1901, and that was followed by anti-dumping laws in other developed countries. So basically the instrument started off being used by the developed countries, and the targets were mainly the developing countries. Okay, so there was this kind of linear relationship. Now this led to a lot of discontent in the developing countries, and slowly they turned around. But when they turned around, it was mainly the bigger developing countries that turned around. Okay, so you see like India, Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, and South Africa. And so, it occurred to them that, we can also use this instrument for our own interest. So, in fact, during the time of the GATT, when the anti-dumping code came into existence in 1979 during the Tokyo round, the developing countries did contribute to its drafting. But they themselves did not always have anti-dumping laws. But when the WTO came into effect on 1st January 1995, a lot of the developing countries drafted their anti-dumping laws based on the WTO anti-dumping agreement. And they also started using it. Now this use was not only against the developed countries in the spirit of retaliation, it was against all types of countries. So the consequence was that today, when you are going to use the anti-dumping instrument, you are a user and a target, and it's not that you're either of them. You can be both as long as you participate in international trade. Whereas, as I said, before the WTO came into existence, this distinction was fairly clear. Now that distinction is more hazy. Okay, so I'm going to focus on India and how it was earlier more a target, and now it's a target and a user both. Okay. So yeah, let's look at India as a target, since I'm going chronologically. So the main users against India were EC, South Africa, and USA. And in fact, this is reflected in the Indian litigation in the WTO as well. Okay, our litigation is mainly with the EC and the US. And since the WTO came into effect, we have had 166 investigations initiated against us. Okay, and we've had 97 anti-dumping measures imposed on us. Now, when we will compare this with India's usage of the anti-dumping mechanism, this will appear minuscule. But actually, in the first 5 years of the operation of the WTO, we were hit by the highest number of anti-dumping measures, that is 15%. And the main industries hit were pharmaceuticals, textiles, and steel. Okay, now let's look at, is there a problem? Okay, so basically, now let's look at the cases in which India was a complainant in the WTO. So here you just see 9 cases, and there are 9 actually. But some of these cases are actually pretty important. Like if you look at 141, so this is a case India versus EC, and the case went on for a very long time. And in this case, the first time the practice of zeroing was condemned. Okay, so that was one case which was quite important. Then you have 206, which was a case again India versus US. So you can see that the litigation is mainly between India and US. So in this case, basically facts available were used against India, and also all the information that India supplied was rejected. So again, very important case, anti-dumping margin of around 74% was used against India. Next case, 217, landmark case, for the simple reason that in this case, not only India but a number of countries came together and filed cases against the US. This included the EC. So India and EC were actually acting together against the US. So interesting from that point of view. And also the anti-dumping duties that the US collected, it would distribute to its producers that had supported the anti-dumping petition. Now this is important because the US anti-dumping law was struck down precisely on this ground. So what was happening was that India or any other exporting country was paying the anti-dumping duties, and those anti-dumping duties were being used to fund or basically subsidize its competitors. So, I just want to highlight how the instrument has been used against developing countries, in this case India. And then you'll actually understand the discontent that it actually created in the developing countries. So now so that was just the context. Now let's go on to the anti-dumping regime in India. So we have a Customs Tariff Act, and we have some sections 9, 9A, 9B, 9C added to it. We have customs tariff rules. Everything's undergone modification and everything, but currently what's in effect is these sections, the Customs Tariff Act and the Customs Tariff Rules. So that's the law. Now who implements the law? We've got two ministries implementing the law, the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Finance. Okay, in the Ministry of Commerce, there's two divisions, the Designated Authority and the Directorate General of Anti-Dumping and Allied Duties, which is currently, I think, recently undergone a name change. I can't recall the name. So these two ministries, they take care of implementation of the law, and if any importer is unhappy with the investigation conducted or the measures imposed, they can go to the CESTAT and then to the Supreme Court. So that's how this works. Now let us see the characteristics of the anti-dumping regime in India, and that's the main part that I'm trying to highlight. Now the first thing is, which is a good thing, is that we actually follow the lesser duty rule, which means that we are going to impose a duty which is lower than the dumping margin if it can remedy the injury caused to the domestic producer. So as I said, that's a good thing. But now comes all the bad things. The bad things are that first, we don't take into account consumers' interests. Now it is the consumers who get cheap goods when the goods are dumped. Okay, so we basically impose anti-dumping duties or conduct investigations, whatever, but we don't take into account consumers' interests. Okay. Then our Ministry of Commerce is the only department to conduct investigations without receipt of application. Now this is allowed under Article 5.6 of the Anti-Dumping Agreement, but basically you need injury and basically you need dumping, injury and causal link. So what happens is that whether you have received an application to start an anti-dumping investigation or whether you have not received it, you still require to have dumping, injury and causal link. And that is frequently absent when we initiate these investigations without receiving applications. Okay, then another thing is that when we do have to interpret whether injury has occurred to our domestic industry, at times we have also interpreted material injury to mean material retardation in the establishment of a domestic industry. Again, this is allowed. And also the anti-dumping agreement is silent on it. But during the time of the gap, there was a panel ruling which said that this injury which occurs in the future cannot be combined with an injury that occurs in the present, like with injury, or in the near future, like threat of injury. When we have interpreted material injury, we have combined these two. So we have interpreted future injury with present injury or future injury with near future injury. So given that GATT rulings are key in the WTO, that may be problematic. Okay. Then of course the next point I want to make is that we have started our investigations despite insufficient evidence. So this is related to the point I was saying earlier, that sometimes we have not even identified the national producers of the imports, that is the domestic industry. Sometimes we have negative dumping margins. So these kind of things are there. Then another thing which is very important is that we do not disclose the reasoning behind the imposition of the anti-dumping measure. So what we do is we receive the point of view or the arguments of both parties, we summarize them, but we don't mention that which is the actual point on which the decision to impose anti-dumping duties is based. Then we also levy final anti-dumping duties retroactively, for which no provisional anti-dumping duties were imposed, even though the two periods must correspond as per the anti-dumping agreement. Then the anti-dumping agreement says that if anti-dumping duties have been paid and they are higher than the basic anti-dumping duties paid are higher than the amount which was due, then they should be reimbursed to the producers without any conditions. But we attach a condition to it. We say that we'll reimburse it only if you haven't passed it on to the consumer. But there is no way to find out if the duties have been passed on to the consumer or not. So our condition is going to be difficult to implement. And the other thing, of course, is that our courts are very slow. And the fact that the courts are slow is used by domestic industry, because they know that once they file an anti-dumping petition, the case is going to be really slow. So the fact of the courts being slow is being used by domestic industry for protection. Okay, now let's look at India as a user. So our first case was in 1992, and in 1998 we had the DGAD that was created in the Ministry of Commerce. Now when this DGAD was created, the Ministry of Commerce clearly said it is being created to protect the domestic industry, and a lot of personnel was transferred to it. Then our main targets are mainly developing countries, which includes China. In fact, China is one of our biggest targets, and one of the reasons why we don't have China filing cases against us in the WTO is purely cultural. In the WTO, filing of cases is a purely contentious act, but in China, litigation is not a purely contentious act. They view it as something political. So they're very concerned about not ruining their relationship with India, and therefore they don't want to file cases. But I don't know if this desire not to file cases is going to continue for very long. And of course we have other targets like EC, Korean, Chinese, Taipei. Now let us come to the main point. How many cases have we initiated and how many measures have we imposed? So we've initiated 677 cases and we've imposed 508 measures. Compare with what India has been subjected to, 166 and 97. So you can see that the gap is huge. And the main industry that demands protection in India is chemicals and petrochemicals. So this is nothing new because this is in the world, the whole world, the chemicals and petrochemicals industry is very strong and is able to get protection in most countries. Now why do we have such high use of anti-dumping mechanism? One, mainly after liberalization. 1991 we liberalized our economy, so therefore you can see the first case arose in 1992. And as you know, anti-dumping is used as a political instrument by states to convince domestic industry of liberalization, and to get their support for liberalization. Then we lost the India QR's case, and therefore, we had to dismantle our quantitative restrictions. And another thing is that with the GATT and Uruguay round, tariffs have come down systematically, which means loss of income. Now, another thing about this high use of anti-dumping mechanism is that it may sometimes have a positive consequence, but it's very short-lived. Now, what is that positive consequence? Is that if exporter A exports to India and is subject to anti-dumping duties, exporter B might want to export the same product. So it's in a way increasing competition in the Indian market, but as I said, it's short-lived because the domestic industry will again file cases to get protection. That's it. Then let's come to the last point. Okay, so these are the cases in which India was a respondent. Now these cases are interesting. None of them led to reports. As you can see, the first and the third cases are mainly related to chemicals. And as I said, that's the industry that demands protection. Case 306 is very interesting. Now all these three cases highlight the irregularities that India made in the investigations. Now 306 is interesting because it was the first case filed by an LDC in the history of the multilateral trading system. And in this case, India had an out-of-court settlement with Bangladesh. Now in this case, basically Bangladesh accused us of imposing anti-dumping duties on its products, and that too in violation of the anti-dumping law of the WTO. And there's a very interesting paper on this written by Amit Asleen. So in that, of course, the paper is very political, but what's important for our purpose is that when the mutually agreed solution came, India actually denied the fact that it had imported any batteries from Bangladesh. So, the volte-face is so alarming, the turnaround is so alarming. And of course that goes to show that the irregularities that we're making, we're actually admitting that we're making them. Okay, so let's go to, that's my last slide. So how can we reduce the use of anti-dumping in developing countries, including India? Although one of the ways of reducing the anti-dumping usage is by considering the interest of importers, because it's the livelihood. Then the interest of the users of imports, they want cheap materials. Then the interest of the consumers, because they also want cheap goods. And then another thing we can do is make our anti-dumping regime more transparent, because currently the investigations that are conducted, we don't, those who are party to it, of course they know about it, they're informed. But apart from that, we don't really get public information of these investigations, how they are being conducted. Another thing is we should give reasoned decisions, and this is actually helpful if the case is going to be adjudicated in the WTO, because we'll have some legal reasoning on which we can defend ourselves. Currently, we have no legal reasoning, and if we are hoping that the absence of legal reasoning will allow us to take any justification in the WTO, I don't think that it's very helpful. Then another thing we can do is separate the DGAD from the Ministry of Commerce to restrain arbitrary anti-dumping actions. Venezuela has done this because, as I said, the DGAD was established to protect the domestic industry. Okay, so the protection may happen even when the conditions of anti-dumping have not been satisfied. So if we separate it from the Ministry of Commerce, probably to get more independence. Another thing, as I mentioned, we should interpret material injury to mean material retardation in the establishment of a domestic industry, but exercise caution in it. This I mentioned earlier. And the second last point which I want to make is that we could also take the help of regional organizations to monitor our anti-dumping applications and see if those applications are frivolous or are they authentic. And these regional organizations could also monitor whether the domestic authorities are complying with WTO law when they are implementing the WTO anti-dumping agreement. So basically what I'm arguing is that whether or not we agree with the anti-dumping law of the WTO, we have to scrupulously apply it. And if we don't agree with it, we have to make some proposals for its change. The fact that we do not comply with it is not justified because we disagree with it. Till now, India has been very vocal and it has said that the developed world is not following the anti-dumping agreement. The anti-dumping agreement needs to be made more strict and loopholes need to be closed. But the point is that once it's made more strict and once the loopholes are closed, we are going to find it very difficult to implement it. Thank you.
Next speaker is Ritu Gupta, on non-performing assets.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would express my gratitude to Professor M.P. Singh for providing me with this opportunity to be part of this colloquium. Then I am thankful to dear Prabhash, who with very humility and very politely, he could tell me that though my topic didn't sync with the theme of the day, but somehow both of us sat together and we could manage to make it part of the colloquium. And before Prabhash told me this, I just had one point because I wanted to talk about banking today, especially non-performing assets. So I knew that this banking is in the Constitution, entry 45 of list 1 is where banking is provided. So this is where we had started with today's paper. And secondly, I'm really thankful to the previous speakers who provided legitimacy to my topic. First of all, it was Justice Sikri, who talked about economy, who talked about inclusive growth, and then he talked about nationalization of banks. So from there, the tone for my paper along with this colloquium scheme, that was also set. Yeah. So, and I would refer to few of the previous speakers because one was Nupur, who very, in just one line, she expressed this point that rarely we get this opportunity to express our gratitude to our teachers. So it is my proud privilege to present my this paper in presence of my previous teachers, my teachers, Professor M.P. Singh and Professor V.V. Pandey is also here. Then Uday had talked about economic policy. How do I? Yeah, because Uday had talked about economic policy, and he talked about that these economic policies should focus on growth, because we are not talking about the how the distribution is to take place. So let us talk about how the problems related to the Indian economy, whatever is required to boost the economy, those steps we need to talk here. And non-performing assets, I chose this topic because non-performing asset is one such barrier to this growth of economy if we are talking about India. So this one quote which I have just taken, you borrow in lakhs from a bank, you are in trouble with the bank, and you borrow in crores, the bank is in trouble with you. This is what is really happening in India. Because in India, if very briefly I'll just talk about the scenario of banking here so that we can actually go to the theme of the paper. So when we are talking about banking in India, the position is very mixed kind of, because we have private as well as public sector banks which are flying. So my paper is going to focus on this non-performing assets and public sector banks in India. So there we see, and this panacea of Indradhanush I chose because Indradhanush package has been recently launched by Indian government. If you have been reading the newspapers and listening to Prime Minister Modi's speech and our Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley, then Raghuram Rajanji, the RBI governor. So there they are talking about this panacea of Indradhanush in the terms of providing a package to these public sector banks who are reeling under this pressure of non-performing assets. So this is how I am going to discuss, and I would focus on this point that this Indradhanush package, which has been recently launched by the government, that of course holds many promises, has got 7 contours, the Vidya-mitra which has been promised by the government. But yes, of course, as always, there are certain challenges, and how best we can do it. This is what I am going to present today with you. So I am not going into any technical definitions, but to introduce you to this concept of non-performing assets. You see, non-performing assets are those assets which stop performing for the banks. So those accounts which become non-viable and non-performing in terms of whatever guidelines or the norms have been set up by Reserve Bank of India, because Reserve Bank of India being the regulator. So here if you see, because broadly if you want to understand what NPA is, whenever any kind of mismatch happens to crop up between the assets and the liabilities of, we are talking in terms of the debts. So this is one, this point I have taken from the Statement of Objects and Fees of the SARFAESI Act, which is one of the tools to handle this menace of non-performing assets. But along with this, we are talking about the government's policy, that in the Indradhanush package. If you see, these are certain recent statistics, because so many changes are happening to the economy of India and so many initiatives have been very recently taken. And I hope Chair is going to agree with me, because we both being the teachers for banking here, we are sharing this problem that recently there are new packages which are somehow rendering the previous policies and previous laws, previous guidelines sort of I just can't use the word useless, but we are to update every time those new launches with those what were happening earlier. And my paper is going in tune with what Surya has just mentioned. Surya is talking about instrumentality of the state. So here the focus there also in his paper was also he talked about, because so many importance has been now acquired, so much domain has been acquired by private sector that we can't afford to compete. The public enterprises can't afford to compete with them if we do not change the age-old practices. If we are talking about here in my paper, if we are talking about Indian economy. So just see these statistics here. I am talking about that. If you are talking about this quarter, March 2015. So these stressed assets as on March 2015, they were 11.6% of gross advances. And bad loans, if you see, if we are just talking about 30 borrowed accounts of these public sector banks as on 31st March. So just see, this is how the figures go. And why we are talking about these non-performing assets? Because non-performing assets somehow they are going to affect adversely if you talk about the profitability, if you talk about liquidity, or if you talk about the solvency. So in all, related to all these three things, these non-performing assets, they do not let any of the noble initiatives emerge truly or to acquire for what they are designed. So these mounting level of NPAs, they of course create this kind of repercussions to the economy, which has got no ripple effect. So these NPAs are not the concern of only the lenders, because it's not only for the banks who, if we term that they are the lenders of that money, so if any loan gets bad, then it is only their concern. Ultimately, it has got wide impact on our economy and to the lender in terms of not only because the money is not being received back, but also because they can't afford to, handle this situation without providing support to those who are not able to repay. See here, because we just cannot afford these defaulters, because ultimately somehow the capacity of this bank, because this is how the banks function, whatever capital they have, then they use it for giving credit, and they expect some profit on that credit. So one part is that profit is not being attained if those loans become bad debt, and second is that they are not able to do their business. So double losses is being felt by these. So this is the prudential norm which regulates the definition of non-performing assets. So very simply we have just put it, if any loan that way or any advance which becomes overdue for a period of more than 90 days in respect of a term loan, then that account would be termed as non-performing asset, and an asset that includes a lease asset when it ceases to generate income for the bank. These are few of the impact indicators if we are talking about these non-performance assets. So see, these are just few of these, because capital adequacy level is one, profitability of the bank, as I just discussed, is another. Then we have certain problem related to employment generation, we have living standard of people, and there are many more. So I'll just stick to few of the important points before I move on to that package of Dhanush. If you see these Basel norms, capital should be 8% of the risk-weighted assets, and this distribution base is increasing wherever profitability is falling. Where is profitability is falling? So this is where the actual impact can be felt. Yeah. Now I come to this part, because we are not talking about those private players here who have registered profits more in this last quarter. The profits which they have registered is far more than what used to be the situation earlier. So just see here, they constitute one of the important organ of the banking sector, and all of us are aware about that nationalization which had taken place earlier. So these public sector banks are really heading towards bad times, and it's not only to scare, it's because we have already started feeling the fallouts. So see here, among these 39 listed banks in India, both private and public, 4 recorded net losses in the March quarter. And because why I am talking every time about this quarter of 2015, because the situation was not the same if you talk about the previous quarters. Though losses were still there, but this situation has drastically changed in this last quarter. See here, 9 other public banks recorded a drop in net profit compared with the year ago quarter, and for a few of them the drop has been pretty sharp. The sole reason for the losses and the drop in net profits is ballooning bad assets for which banks need to set aside money. When we are talking about banks to keep money aside, that is because they need some capital which they do not have, because they are not getting their capital back. Because that particular loan which has become sticky loan, so they are not getting it back, so more infusion of capital is required, and that is where the government intervention is needed. Yeah, see, and that is despite it's not that we do not have laws, we have number of laws to handle all these situations. So we have our own debt recovery tribunals which were supposed to came into being so that faster mode of recovery could be adopted by them. They could adopt summary procedure. They are the specialized tribunals. Everything associated the same way we associate with any other specialized tribunals. But they have failed miserably. And if you see, then we came up with SAFESI Act. So this SURFACE Act was also one which provided some kind of wheels to the economy when it was conceived and then implemented in 2002. But if we talk about these 2002 to 2015, a lot of water has flown into the rivers, but if you talk in terms of the recovery of loans, the performance has been very, very dismal. So I have just taken two of the cases, though there are plenty of cases, and daily even Supreme Court is talking about all these NPAs, plethora of cases we have, because I just focused on this one case, which is one landmark case on this, where constitutional validity of the SURFACE Act got challenged. And there, why? Because we are talking here about certain problems which are there in the legal process of recovery of these bad loans. So there, because one arbitrary provision was there that you had to deposit 75% of, if this tribunal passes certain orders against you as debtor, then if you want to go in appeal, then this one provision which was considered to be draconian was that the 17.2, that you are to first deposit 75% of the total amount and then only you can go in for appeal. So this was one struck down here, and the unconstitutional, arbitrary, oppressive and unreasonable, those things, and this particular provision was struck down, and then we had certain amendments. And then this transport was also there. Because when you are talking about the recovery of these non-performing assets, you have specialized tribunals. In that tribunal, you have one DRT Act and another you have SURFACE Act. So this SURFACE Act, somehow some kind of ambiguity arose. And this parallel proceedings, whether under SURFACE and this Recovery of Debt Due to Banks and Financial Institutions Act 1993, which had arose, was struck down. Again, this position was clarified, and it was decided that yes, both the parallel proceedings can go on. So there was no hassle. Yeah. See here, those were the cases, and after that, if you are talking about stressed bank assets, RBI has under the leadership of Mr. Raghuram Rajan has taken a lot of initiatives. He is trying to put whatever projects are there on track, because again, it's not just supporting your dying enterprises. It's about because you are really focusing on your economy. So there are certain rules, certain guidelines, whatever, because whatever our guidelines RBI issues, those become the law for the banks. So RBI has brought in rules to prevent the misuse of the loan restructuring facility by making the process expensive for banks, because this restructuring was not able to pick up in India. And early identification of stress was made mandatory. This early identification of stress, though it is considered to be one of the measures which is talked in the Dhanush package also. But if you see here, because till then there was no such guideline with the bank, that because they were waiting till it actually goes bad. So now RBI has issued this guideline that yes, so you can very easily you can assess, because it's not only at the time of lending, but if after that also at certain stage you can feel that yes, like the way we have weather forecast. So if you can somehow by adopting certain means make out that this loan is going to be proved bad later on, then at very early stage you can categorize. But as we were talking about that instrumentality of state, and we were talking about public sector enterprises and private sector. So if you see in the banking sector also, and I hope the chair is going to agree here, that because whatever initiatives were being taken by RBI, those initiatives were somehow being slowed down by the policies which our governments they keep on announcing just for their political, to fulfill their political promises. So this is how this is where the process, or the what you term that redressal mechanism, the pace of the redressal mechanism is slowed down. Yeah. This is how I come to the important part of my presentation, where I am talking about this panacea of Indradhanush. It was only in August 2015 that it was launched by the government, and just to boost the economy, and at the same time when you are talking about boosting the economy, you are to provide that shoulder to those public sector banks which were reeling under the pressure of these non-performing assets. And after that nationalization, banks nationalization, so this is considered to be one of the most significant package which government has announced, and this is a 7-pronged strategy, as we term it, as we say that the contours may be compared in the shades of Vidya, to improve the condition of these state-run banks. And several incremental measures are there. I have just taken on all these 7. Just see, first it talks about appointments, because as far as appointment of the officers who are actually able to decide, that power lies with the government. So this is one problem itself. And now government has changed the policy. Then if you are talking about this de-stressing public sector banks from this non-performing assets or whatever related to capital, so that more infusion of the capital has been done. So this capitalization also pertains to the same. Then we have this empowerment. If you are talking about empowering these public sector banks, then of course you need to make them, least interference from the government is required. So this is one empowerment. And then framework of accountability, where you are talking about corporate governance. So all those accountability, transparency, those systems, because in public sector banks the system has been, as far as these credit, security, debts is concerned, system has been opaque. Least transparency. We are not bothered about, because if you know the bank manager, if you know somebody in the bank, then somehow the functions, your work is done. Without looking into whether you deserve that loan, without complying with the directions, whatever guidelines are there for providing loan. And all these governance reforms. So these are the shades of this Indradhanush. See here, if we are talking about till November 9, 2015, selection of non-executive chairman and remaining 6 state-owned public sector banks. So appointing MD and CEO too has been done recently. So this is where government now has, earlier what was the situation, that no, this kind of position would be given to a person. That was political appointment. Now they have signed this, they have just made this provision that now you can have those who are working even in the private sector. So we can appoint such persons also. There is one more initiative which talks about creation of bank board bureau. So this is again one of the, which in my understanding, because the work on this paper is still under progress, and this is a very recent initiative. So we are just, I am just studying the importance of this mechanism is that now this bank board bureau is going to comprise of eminent professionals. So it's not only about eminent professionals from the government. So that is the main change which has come up with this Indradhanush thing. Then this additional capital infusion which was recently announced by the government. If you see here, 25,000 crore rupees of capital into these debt-laden banks in this fiscal year in phased manner. So one by one they are going to do it. Very recently they have done it, and out of these 20,000 crore rupees would be injected. It was planned that by September they are going to infuse this, and rest 5,000 crore rupees will be performance-based allocation to be allocated in the last quarter of 2016. So I believe that this is one of the mechanism to revive these dying public sector banks. Yeah. And if you see here, de-stressing these public sector banks and improving these governance standards, if you see, to develop this vibrant debt market for public sector banks in order to reduce lending pressure on banks, strengthen asset reconstruction companies, because these ARCs were one who were to share this, these non-performing assets. So, but this concept was not being picked up in India, because again of the maximum interference by the government and least flexi rules, that this problem got created. And if you are talking about this empowerment, again, as I have just discussed, that we are talking about providing flexibility in hiring of manpower. And then this problem of accountability, that whatever vigilance process is required for quick action, because in government system, as happens in the ministry, similarly in PSBs, that even if you doubt some debtor, but you can't just take action. Why you can't take action? Because you need to clear so many files from the government. So though these banks are considered to be autonomous, but still everything moves from the ministry, and that takes months before you could detect that kind of fraud or that kind of bad loan. So this is what has been done. So this is going to somehow, I believe, streamline this vigilance process for quick action in case major frauds and where those frauds are attained with the help of the staff. So that was again because I had done some work on this also, that if you are looking into the details of any bank fraud, so that fraud includes non-performing assets also, because that debt which was given was never meant to be paid back because of so many reasons plus connivance of the bank officials. So to check that, now we have this one provision of accountability, that who is one who is going to clear this particular file. So that kind of measure has been taken up here. And this is what you term as bankers retreat, next Gyan Sangam, which is going to be held in January 2016. So there again they are going to talk about these governance reforms, that whatever initiatives have been launched, and based on that whatever guidelines have been issued by RBI, what is going to be the result. Yeah. See here. So this is the proposition of the author in this paper, and if you see here, because if this 7-point agenda is followed, then what can happen, that these banks can potentially grow faster. See that today every young man wants to have an account with the private bank, because they do not want to work with the sluggish kind of procedure strategy which is being followed by public sector undertakings. So it was actually these public sector banks which had given help to these private banks when they were in their nascent stage. Now once they are fully grown, now they have started eating out our profit just because of our policies, which could kept pace with the changing times and the requirements, whatever requirements of the banking is there, technology is there. So if you see here, the NPA moves, if you are talking about other than this economic slowdown which is happening, so there are certain factors. See, one I just discussed, because the FACI Act, this DRT Act, was not able to sufficiently perform. Then we have this fast and efficient judicial system, which is the utmost requirement for resolution of NPAs. Okay, so the chair is telling me to stop. I'll just quickly come to, I'll just take 1 minute to wind it up. See here, this bankruptcy law, which is the need of the hour, we are taking more than the desired time. See here, willful defaulter remains one issue. All of us are aware about that Vijay Mallya's thing. So if you see that kind of willful defaulter, where promoters of the company, they do not suffer. It's only the company and the consumers. So who actually suffer. So I'll just skip these because this financial inclusion has already been discussed. Because there is one important point which I have taken in my paper is whatever points are, or the policies like Jan Dhan Yojana is announced by the government, they are to be met by Sarkari banks. So these Sarkari banks, they are just meeting out their targets and they forget about following the provisions and the guidelines. This is the Vijay Mallya's case which I just skipped because I don't have the permission from the chair. And this is at the end, I had just proposed that this program, success of this program is going to depend on the relentless implementation of all these agendas. And I'll just take the permission of the chair to express my gratitude to Professor MP Singh because there are just couple of lines which I just scribbled here. So do I have your permission to just list? So I have crossed my time limit here. So sir, these lines for you. आप मार्गदर्शक हैं, प्रेरणा स्रोत हैं, भाव करें कैसे व्याख्यानों से आपके. When I say Vyakyan here, it includes all those interpretation of the case Supreme Court judgments, that includes the articles and the exceptions. So, व्याख्यानों से आपके संविधान हुआ और सशक्त. खूबियां ढेरों हैं, वर्णन करें कुछ प्रमुख. मिलनसार विनम्र स्वभाव सदैव रहे हंसमुख. स्नेहिल सानिध्य बना रहे, यूं ही बरसाते रहें दुआएं. भाग्यशाली हम सब आशीर्वाद सदैव यूं ही पाएं. नतमस्तक भाव विह्वल आपके पुराने विद्यार्थी. प्रभु प्रदान करे स्वास्थ्य एवं लंबी उम्र. प्रार्थना करते हम सब प्रार्थी.
Thanks for that thought-provoking paper, and also for that poetry which expressed the views of all of us. now the session is open for the for questions. I just got few questions so that after you all start asking, I should not forget my First is, it's to Suryadev. See, you laid out a case for expanding the definition of state. Have you looked at what are the implications of expanding the definition of state, or what are the other means by which we have already? It's all right to say that there are human rights against private individuals also, but aren't those already taken care of? What is it additional that we would be getting by extending the definition of state? Because as far as I can understand, that wherever it is necessary, the court has already, by imposing upon the state a duty to implement the law, already in a roundabout manner, trying to achieve whatever was you were seeking to achieve. So, if you can look, and second is expanding the definition of state. You are expanding what is the domain of private duties. Many of those private duties, the duties which have been imposed upon are there exclusively for the state. You can't impose those particular private duties upon an individual. Pravash, you gave out a case with regard to something like a negative link procedure of which is followed in administrative law for the treaty. One thing which I thought, is, there are two aspects which came to my mind. One is negative link procedure, or whatever it is, it will be applicable to all types of treaties. There will be some treaties which are more in the nature of a money bill or finance bill, which is there only for the, say, for the Lok Sabha. And the second is, if the government is uncertain with regard to the support of, it won't be getting around it, the parliament, I think a mere ordinance taking away, abrogating the legislation for a few days and entering into a treaty would be a means by which it can get around whatever restrictions the parliament would be imposing. If it has to come to the parliament later on, it's fine. Of course, then it has got no incentive to do. But if it is something which it need not come to the parliament, it might just get around the parliament by abrogating it for a few days by an ordinance. Pallavi, I just looked into, when you talked about that the decisions of the anti-dumping authorities were not reasoned. But I would say many of us will feel that most of the decisions of administrative authorities in economic matters suffer from the same defect. Especially, it's not just with regard to it. Here it's a foreigner which is in play, but people would say that most of the economic authorities, income tax decisions by income tax authorities, decisions by SEBI, all of them suffer from the same defect. It's arbitrariness, it's perhaps they have not been trained with the idea how to present the case, judgment writing has not been given. Perhaps they might, the fact that we believe in a specialist bureaucracy which is later on assigned a task, it doesn't know what are the reasons why it should be taking a decision. It has already taken a decision by its instincts but can't lay out the decisions. It's a common phenomena. That's all. Okay. Other questions? Amar.
Couple of questions. One to Dr. Prabhash. Agreed that parliamentary scrutiny of these bilateral treaties and other treaties that we are doing if we increase it is good, but do we look at it from the point of view of executive power of the union, and as Supreme Court has been defining it in terms of residuary legislature? This is one. Second, isn't it that it amounts to, you see, with Article 51 that state is expected to promote respect for international law and all that. So isn't it that if we are, you see, union, this executive has done it, we are further subjecting it to some kind of a scrutiny. Does it amount to saying that we are really disrespecting law in any way? This is Dr. Prabhash. And then Dr. Surya, you had talked about this instrumentality doctrine. What exactly the ambit of this liberalization of the state definition of the article? Not much work, to my understanding, has been done in this area, but I recall one or two dissents that Justice Sinha has given, particularly in a case like Keshwarag Industry, where he talks about state action doctrine. Can we really, have you ever looked at that, instrumentality doctrine from that perspective? Could that be one criterion where we could, design our own definition of state action doctrine for it? Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got three questions. One from Professor Surya. When you talk about the obligation of private entities, why private entities should have obligation? Their obligation ends with the compliance of the law. They pay tax, they comply with all the legal provisions, and therefore why they should have obligation towards human rights. This is always a kind of pressing question when you bring in private entities into the realm of human rights law. One to ask, is it the case of more scrutiny on this premise that this new international, the categorization what you're doing about human rights international treaty or treaty on investment, this categorization is more based on furtherance of furtherance of individuals' interest. When you talk about international human rights law, where the one who is at the center is human being or individual, and when you talk about international investment treaty, the one who is at the center is the interest of corporation. And when you talk about the interest of the corporation, obviously the interest of individual is somewhere getting negotiated, and therefore you are proposing more scrutiny by parliamentary formulation or parliamentary forum, because you have somewhere this apprehension that the executive is not addressing the concern of individuals while negotiating on subjects like investment or trade. And one question to Professor Ritu Gupta, there is something like raising the concern of we the people, that why we do not see richer people who takes loan and doesn't repay, not committing suicide, and we see farmers committing suicide when they take loan, and which runs into thousands or lakhs. So do you think somewhere this is lack of strength of the law, or the approach of the law enforcement agency which results into this unfortunate scenario? Thank you.
Professor Surya.
Yeah, it's undeniable that both from R.D. Shetty, Ajay and PKP, both all of them destroy the functional approach and uphold the controlled approach. However, my question is, in Z Films and subsequently in the 2015 case of Bihar Cricket Association, though they affirmed the entire series of cases from R.D. Shetty, they also hold that the BCCI or any non-state body is subject to writ jurisdiction. Do you see this as a positive outcome? Because what we see here is that the content of the duties is the same. However, the source of approaching the court or the forum is just different. So, still the implication is that the content of duties is still the same, of being fair. Yeah, thank you.
So two questions.
two questions for Professor Suryadeva. One is, do you see, this probably echoes something that Professor Rai said. Do you see the rights applying in the same manner to private entities as they would to the state? All rights to the same extent, or would there be different limitations on these rights when they apply to private entities? Would you envisage them as applying in the same manner or not? As the first question. And the second, taking into account some of the concerns on the other side of having these duties and rights, these duties and obligations on private institutions, why not think about indirect horizontality as the via media? And we've had cases, though, Zoroastrian society, the Supreme Court said we do not have that model of indirect horizontality. In the recent case, the Bollywood makeup artist case, the Charulata, I'm not forgetting the full name, but the court has reaffirmed the indirect horizontality case. So if our concern is about horizontality, taking into account the concern that there are private entities are supposed to meet the law, standards, requirements of the law, why not impose the obligation on the state to not not give effect to any private bargain or any private negotiation which violates fundamental rights? And I had a couple of questions for Prabhash as well. So I had a bit of confusion about your argument. Are you saying that parliamentary scrutiny should extend at least to international economic treaties or only to international economic treaties? Because if you're saying only to international economic treaties, there are of course other implications of other international treaties as well. Federalism, it has an impact on the federal structure, of course, by virtue of 253. And the argument that you made about bilateral investment treaties, that they don't even need any kind of transformation. The same is actually true quite often about other treaties, because you have wide rule-making powers and the executive brings it under the rule-making powers, or the Supreme Court in its own jurisprudence has said as long as it has signed and ratified the treaty, we can take it into account in interpreting and applying. So different ways in which the law, the international obligations have a bearing on domestic law without going through the parliamentary approach. And in that context, just another model for you to consider is the one that Canada has, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the UK has, which is the parliamentary, their equivalent of the standing committee scrutiny approach, which is the model to look at. Thank you.